Visit abaeservices.com for fast medical transcription service. This podcast episode is brought to you by AB Music Creative.
This episode is brought to you by Dr. Lourdes Capulong.
I have developed through medical school all of the Western vernacular that doctors are supposed to use to talk about why cancer happens. But as I've become 56 years old, I have discovered things about the universe that they don't teach you in medical school. And that tells a completely different story about why cancer happens. So the doctor answer is that there are genetic mutations, either inherited from your parents or just through living your life, and all your cellular activity just makes mistakes in the genetic programming. And if there's a mistake made in a gene that controls for cell growth, that can lead to a cell growing out of control, and that mutates and becomes cancer. And there are environmental factors or, a variety of things that can lead to that. But the other way that I now look at cancer, and I really rarely share this with patients because they don't want to hear it. They want to hear the Western medical stuff. But I think that in a very real sense, in a manner that's much deeper than we ever appreciate on a normal daily basis, but in a very real sense, the entire universe is just a flow of energy.
Yes.
And when that energy sometimes gets dark or is not moving in a healthy manner, it's moving into a dark place, that's what can lead to disease, including cancer. And I think that they're both accurate, and they're both just different ways of explaining the same thing.
Thank you for bringing that up, Doc, because I remember when my mom had cancer, when two of my friends had cancer, these are all women, the common denominator, aside from, and they had different lifestyles, but the only common denominator were the men in their lives.
Mm.
The men in their lives were giving them a hard time, and they were all martyrs.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, right?
The energy.
That's a heavy energy
Very
for a
heavy,
person
yes.
to absorb.
Yes.
And we are not an infinite reservoir of absorbing negative energy, right? Things can get broken and diseases can happen.
And to your metaphor a while ago, net. Even if you describe yourself as being a net, nets only sift through what can pass through them. There are residues
right.
that are left, and eventually they accumulate over time, right?
Yeah, that's why you got to clean your net out every day.
Exactly, right? So now, did you know about this before going to your night voodoo practice, or your night voodoo practice led you to uncover this part that energy had everything, or probably something to do with why cancer happened?
Yeah, the work that I did that led me to become a psychedelic medicine doctor,
yes,
is the same work that taught me about energy and taught me that there is another way to think of the universe other than everything is made out of particles that started at the Big Bang. That there's literally two ways of perceiving the universe.
Can you take us back to your epiphany? I'm very curious. What led you to What led you to that? How old were you? Were you a practicing doctor already, or were you in med school? Take us back.
Well,
this is very interesting.
Yeah, no,
and the only reason why I'm just learning this, like this year in 2023, and we were talking about this, like whatever it is that, I'm just learning now, and I'm very, very curious, because at some point it has to come to us for us to have clarity of what life is and what our purpose is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way the world is designed and the way we're designed as human beings, more specifically, the way our mind is designed, we're designed to believe that the physical reality that we live in is all that there is. And our culture has developed a sense that anything outside of what you can see and perceive is just fantasy or woo-woo or fairy tales or wishful thinking.
And you've always questioned that, or you embraced that at one point in your life?
No, I was very much brainwashed by the greater Academy of Science. I thought anything that had to do with something non-physical was just bullshit. It was woo-woo. Right. But I have a completely different perspective now. And so you asked where that developed from. And I just want to warn your listeners that this is a story that requires them to kind of put a seatbelt on, because it's really, really mind-blowing. And
blow our minds, Doc.
Well, the challenge is that a handful of people can kind of follow the mind-blowing stuff, but another handful of people are going to be like, that's crazy, and tune out. So I apologize if you get a few people clicking out of this podcast. But it starts when I was in my mid-40s, early 40s, and a bunch of bad things had happened to me in my life. And I was sucked into a pretty severe depression. So serious enough that I started wondering if killing myself was the only way to make my pain go away. I was going to see a psychiatrist. I was on a bunch of different psych meds, and I had a talk therapist that I saw weekly, and nothing was helping me. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, Randy, why don't you come over to my house?" And I'm going to keep the details private just for my own personal safety. But a friend of mine said, "Come over to my house and participate in a medicine ritual." And I thought to myself, ooh, well, I've never done that before. And mind you, I was a product of the 80s, and I am probably the only kid who believed that commercial with the frying pan and the egg. This is your brain on drugs. Yeah. Remember that? And so I figured I want to be a doctor, so I can't take any drugs. But at the point that I was suicidal, I was like, well, what can I lose? So I went over to a friend's house, and I participated in a medicine ritual where I didn't have any of the metrics that I now look for as a doctor of psychedelic medicine. I just giggled for like 4 or 5 hours, maybe 6. I giggled so hard that my stomach hurt. But when I woke up the next morning, my depression was completely gone. Like, I was totally cured. And I instantly knew that something had shifted inside my brain. I knew it wasn't some temporary thing. I had a different outlook on life. And I stopped taking all my psych meds that day. And I called my psychiatrist on Monday and like, "Thanks for your help. None of it worked. I found something else and I'm fine now. So I'm going to stop your medicine." And I knew exactly what she was going to say, because I say this to my cancer patients when I gave them Prozac, and 2 weeks after their Prozac starts working, they go, "I'm fine. I don't need it anymore." And I go, "No, it just started working. You can't stop." And so this is what this woman said. And I said, "No, there was a fundamental shift in my brain chemistry. I don't need this stuff anymore." And that was 14 years ago or so. But then I never ever thought about going back to these medicines. I didn't really understand what they could offer until I had a cancer patient that I saw.
How many years later?
About 1.5 years later.
Okay.
Had a cancer patient, and I see my patients undergoing radiation once a week. And I think it was on the second week I was about to go in, and this patient's girlfriend pulls me aside and says, "Dr. Scharlach, I have to tell you, your friend," we'll just call him L to keep him private, "your friend L is a druggie." And I go, "Okay, tell me about what's going on." She goes, "Well, once a month, these hippies come over to our house and they take magic mushrooms and MDMA and LSD at the same time."
Oh my God.
And she just sits there waiting for me to go, "Okay, let's go in there and give him a lesson." And I just thought about it and I said, "That is awesome." I was like, wow, what does this guy know that I don't? So I walk in there and I go, "So I heard about your parties every month." And he goes, "Parties? No, they're not parties." He said, "It's work." I said, "What do you mean work?" He goes, "Well, have you ever tried, these kind of medicines?" And I said, "One time." And he said, "Was it work?" I said, "No, I just giggled for 5 hours." And he said, "Well, look, I promise you this. If you adopt these medicines into a spiritual practice on a regular basis, that you will experience personal growth beyond anything you can imagine.
Like exponential kind
Yeah.
of.
Like, putting your, like
Transcending.
transcending. Yeah. My whole mindset about what reality is has shifted. But his point is that some of the work along the way to get there will be very, very difficult. Ooh. But he said it's worth the effort. And so I got more deeply into this personal work.
So after that conversation, you had to contemplate about it, right? Or were you like, let me just go?
No, it's interesting. So it like old Randy would have been contemplative about it because I'm very in my head a lot, and I like to think about things. But this was more of felt intuition. I felt that this was the right calling for me, and so I started working with these things. And to specifically answer your question, you asked, well, what happened to me that shifted my perspective? And so during a ceremony, I was walking, talking, just like we are now, but then I closed my eyes, and as soon as I closed my eyes, something fascinating happened that I never knew was a thing. I was telling Michael about this at lunch. I closed my eyes, and my sense of I, like whatever that thing is that I refer to when I use the word I, it stayed the same. But that I retracted out of this mind-body thing called Randy.
Yes.
And it came outside of Randy, and it went, oh, wow, I'm not Randy. But then it left the solar system, and then it left the universe, and it looked around, and it remembered something. It remembered that there's only one thing, which is loving energy, that the entire physical universe is manifested from, and that this thing that I thought of was Randy, that is this I, is the I of all that energy, such that you as a consciousness and me as a consciousness are actually sharing the same consciousness.
Yes.
But it's in a pool of energy that's outside of what we can perceive every day, and that and chooses to experience what it's like to be a Randy. So it makes a Randy, and it pops into Randy, and has Randy be its avatar, and it wants to know what it's like to be a Paco. So it makes a Paco, and it sits into Paco, and it's looking out through Paco's eyes, and it's listening to Randy through Paco's ears. And when I kind of came out of that experience, I didn't know what to make of it. I was like, I'd never heard of this concept that the universe is just one thing. I'd never heard of this concept that consciousness is actually shared between people. And so what I did is I started Googling, and I don't remember what search terms I used, but I very quickly found some ancient Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and some certain early Hindu traditions that are entirely based on this concept that the world is based on a loving conscious energy, and that the world that we see as a physical universe is a very, very special type of illusion that comes out of this deeper energy. And that is something that, interestingly enough, one can also approach from the scientific perspective.
Yep.
Because I think I was mentioning that the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics, it was just awarded last October. It was awarded for experimental confirmation of this idea that the entirety of the physical universe is actually running on a mathematical program that's kind of below our level of reality that we can't perceive.
Mm-hmm. Below or above?
Well, either way, just outside
outside the depth of our perception.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
It's like having a fourth dimension, kind of.
Exactly. And that you can approach this mystery of the universe, that there's something making everything happen. You can approach that through scientific experiments, but you can also approach it a completely different way by going inside yourself and transcending your own sense of self and investigating what is my consciousness. And that those two completely different avenues of exploration seem to lead us to the same place.
Which is why when people need to have a breakthrough, they have to let go of all their limiting beliefs.
Absolutely.
Because like to your point, if there's that big pool of consciousness, energy that's abundant in love and everything else, it's the physical Randy, the physical Paco that actually is preventing us from moving forward to the direction where we ought to be or ought to go.
Yeah, well, more specifically, to drill down on that idea, it's your identification as a Paco that is the limitation.
Yep.
And that to transcend that limitation, you simply identify as the consciousness that's having Paco's experience rather than a Paco.
And then and then the fear comes in to prevent us from doing what we need to do, right?
Exactly.
Has both your practice synergized into one benefiting the other? Has it happened already? Have you tried it? Have you bridged them together?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. The answer is yes and no. And so from the broader context, I try very hard to actually keep my two practices very separate.
Right.
And that's because when somebody comes to me to have their life saved and they need radiation, it's a very technical Western medical thing. And most patients are wanting their cancer doctor to remain rigidly stuck in that Western medical context. Not everybody, but a lot of patients don't want to hear about woo-woo things like energy being love and cancer coming from, bad energies flowing. Yeah. It doesn't make people feel comfortable when they've asked me to radiate their cancer. But where this other knowledge has kind of informed the way that I practice is it's helped me be much more patient with my patients and much more compassionate to patients who are difficult. A lot of times a cancer patient is scared.
Yes.
And a lot of times the way they manifest their fear is by being aggressive or belligerent or angry or not listening or not following directions. And when I was younger, I'd get frustrated by that. But now I see them as sacred spirits,
right,
who are attached to an avatar that's struggling, and that anything I'm feeling negative coming from them is just from their avatar, not from their spirit.
Yes, I that makes perfect sense
and
to
so
me.
then I just identify the person as the spirit, and I can discount.
It doesn't become personal anymore.
Exactly. I don't get attached to the way they're behaving.
Yes.